In this segment, Stephanie Miller is joined by a legal analyst to break down the latest on Trump and what may come next. Here's Stephanie.
A ruling for, I know the tea leaves, all our tea leaves are worn out.
Yeah.
But, is there a chance like they're going to do something that tries to just give Trump narrow immunity that I think all of us think it would be ridiculous to go, yes, the president can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rival. But are they going to try to give him some narrow immunity for trying to overthrow the United States government, for instance?
I'd like to think not. I don't think so. I mean, this, there have been a lot of legal issues that Donald Trump has raised, including the 14th Amendment, that are hard. They're difficult issues because there's just not a lot of case law in it. This one is not hard. He cannot be immune from criminal prosecution. Now, the question presented was a pretty narrow one. See, they agree to.
Yes,
the question presented was a narrow one, which is whether and to what extent the president, a former president, is immune for official acts committed while in office. Most of what Jack Smith alleges are not official acts. And so It seems to me this might be one of those situations where they are concerned about if they say a president is not immune, that there could be some room for future abuse. For example, I've heard the argument said, Harry Truman for dropping the bomb.
Right.
Could he have been prosecuted? And I think the correct answer there would be to say no, he was acting as the president. If someone had wanted to impeach him at the time, they could have done that. But that was not a criminal act. That was within the scope of his duties as commander-in-chief of the armed forces.
Yeah.
And similarly, when Barack Obama was ordering drone strikes, there should be immunity for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Acting in good faith, in the best interest of the country, even if maybe in retrospect people say you got it wrong. So I think it may be that they just want to carve out that and say, look, there is this slice for official acts where presidents are immune for behavior, for conduct while in office. But what Donald Trump did here is outside the scope of his duties. Administering elections is the province of the states. The president has no role in that conduct. And so I think it's going to come out okay in the end. My only worry is timing. I think they can decide this quickly enough to get it back on track for trial. My only worry is that they remand it for some findings by the lower court.
Oh, thank God.
Because then, even if Judge Chutkan acts quickly, that could be appealed as well. And then we're looking at trial in 2025.
Yeah, I was going to say, I only finished speed law school like 2 minutes ago, and I know atom bomb is not covered under the... Okay. Listen, I just want to, because it goes to what you just said. Chuck Rosenberg, your friend, legal analyst, said he is bullish that Trump will stand trial in the January 6th. If we have two of you, we have a quorum. He said he remains confident that the court will reject Trump's immunity claim in time to try him. I thought I was the only happy clappy one in time to try him for J6. He said the argument in the Supreme Court on the question of presidential immunity criminal process is April 22nd. The Supreme Court term ends at the end of June, so we will certainly have a decision, or we should have a decision by the end of June, though it could be quicker. The decision in the case we were just discussing, the 14th Amendment clause, took 4 weeks, no later than the end of June. We should have a decision. I'm still bullish. I may be the last person on the planet who believes this case could be tried before the election. But I know it's hard to, like we say, the tea leaves, to predict anything, but do you think there is a chance?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm bullish, and I don't know that I'm confident, which are the words I heard you use that Chuck said. But I do think possible and hopeful. And, I know that many people are frustrated that the court set the date of April 22nd, and my initial reaction was the same. But when you actually look at the briefing schedule in there, they're requiring these parties to act quite quickly to get the oral argument heard on April 22nd. Now, not as quickly as they could have. Mm-hmm. And the fastest thing they could have done is to just summarily affirm what happened in the Circuit Court of Appeals, which rejected the immunity, and get the case right back to trial. But also, if they really were on, a slow boat, they could have just done it in the normal course, which would have been to give Donald Trump 90 days to file his petition and then, time to respond, which would put it on the court's calendar for argument in the fall, and most certainly would not have allowed for a trial this year. So I think they're trying, and things could disrupt that schedule, but it is quite possible. I'll put it at 50-50 whether we get a trial in this case this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be fantastic if it backfires on him, this delay tactic that's worked his whole life, is that he delays till right before the election. But it's true what they keep saying. This rule, DOJ rule, first of all, it's not a rule, but it applies to, this is already in motion. So that rule doesn't apply, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So it's sometimes referred to as the 60-day rule, which is not really written down. It's just, when you get close to an election, around 60 days out, like that's not the time to, spring an indictment on the world. Like, oh, guess what? Joe Biden's been indicted for X, Y, and Z, because there's no time for them to defend themselves. They're not going to go to trial. And so now the public is just out there with this idea that this person has been indicted, and it could unduly influence an election before the case can come to trial. In this case, this indictment was filed last August or something. And so the Justice Department complied with its policy. And so now it's in the hands of the courts. So you would think Donald Trump, if he were an innocent man, would want to clear his good name.
Thank you. Yeah, it's almost like something crazy, like if someone were to say they're reopening like an email investigation or something a few days before an election.
No one would do that, Stephanie. Yeah. No one would ever do that.
That would be crazy. But the other thing, last thing, Barb, is, in terms of the Judge Chutkan went on record saying she would give Trump a certain amount of time to prepare. But as someone said, he's already had all this time. As this goes on and he delays and delays. Don't you feel like that is relevant?
It is, and it seems right, but I think she will, in an effort to demonstrate that he has received all due process, I think she will stay true to her word, because immunity says not only do you have an immunity from going to trial, you have immunity from the burdens of litigation, which includes preparation. And so I think she will give him back every day. I think something like 87 days, and I think she's going to give him back every one of those days.
Yeah, okay. Last one, just because I have to, I've just been losing my shizzle over this Fani Willis thing that I feel like I've just never seen before, is someone on the defense being allowed to prosecute the prosecutor on TV. Before, and I just wanted to get your take. Tristan Snell said in 99.99999% of cases, the Fani Willis issue would have been handled by a judge in chambers during a lunch break. Judge McAfee opened the door, let the clown car take over his courtroom. The mainstream media fell for it and keeps broadcasting it. Total travesty. That was my take on it. Yeah, is that how did this be? How was this allowed to happen? And then based on gossip and speculation.
Yes, and in fact, I think in this case, the ethical issue and the conflict of interest relates to Fani Willis as a manager of her office. If she is hiring her boyfriend and paying him exorbitant fees and going on vacations with him, that might violate some ethical rules in her office, anti-nepotism rules, rules of disclosure, and other kinds of things. But that is not the same as a conflict of interest as to the defendant. I think people are using the terms conflict of interest very loosely. Like, whose rights is there a conflict with? Yeah. It is not the fair trial rights of the defendants. There's nothing about this issue, whether it's true or not, that has anything to do with the guilt or innocence of Donald Trump and his 18 co-defendants.
Thank you.
And so to have this be this sideshow really is part of something I read about in my book, Stephanie. See what I did there? Product placement.
Got a girl. Yay.
Distraction, right? I mean, I am going to distract you from the real issue here, because what I want you to be talking about is Fani Willis, and I'm going to undermine her credibility so that if and when a conviction comes, we can all throw up our hands and say, oh, she has unclean hands. And so I think this is all an effort to smear her and to create a sideshow for this case. I think she may have ethical issues with regard to her role as a manager, but as we said, that really does not have anything to do with this case.
Yeah.
And so all these hearings has created, delay and distraction from what should be a case getting ready to go to trial.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I knew she'd had to be sleeping with a juror or the judge for it to be a conflict. I'm not saying law school was a waste of many years of your life, Barb. I'm just... So you tweeted, SCOTUS says that Congress, not the states, may enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to prevent an insurrectionist from holding federal office. Looks like Trump is staying on the ballot, but voters also have the power to prevent him from holding office. Yes, I get that part, but Barb, help us with this ruling. It feels like they went, I guess as the liberal justices said, they went farther than they had to, right? And isn't... Yeah. Isn't Jamie Raskin correct that they already did this? That Congress already ruled him an insurrectionist?
Yes, which I think is a really interesting point. So the opinion, to me, is not crazy, which is that it's Congress and not the courts who get to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, based on the language. That is not a crazy ruling to me. But as Jamie Raskin said, the House has already voted that he engaged in insurrection. So are we done here? Now,
are we there yet?
We were, of course, doing it for purposes of impeachment, not specifically under this provision. And so I suppose they could go back to the House and try to get that vote again, but it seems really unlikely to me now in light of the fact that the House has flipped to Republicans. I also think that there could be an issue of doing it, sort of retroactively at this point. So whatever the case, it's not going to happen. But you raised the really interesting point of what the concurring justices or dissenting justices, if you read the metadata, have you seen it? This scandal that it was going to be a dissent, and they talked him into calling it a concurring opinion. Justices Kagan and Sotomayor and Jackson would have said, courts should only decide the precise issue in front of them and no more. And the majority actually went a little bit further and said, states can't do this. And that was the precise issue before them. But then they went a little bit further and said only Congress can do it. And they also seemed to suggest that only Congress can do it by enacting enabling legislation. Mm-hmm. And that's the part I think that they bristled at, because it's not necessary, and so that's not the way courts are supposed to work. They're not supposed to reach questions that are not before them. In their defense, I will say what they're probably trying to do, though, is rather than keep us all guessing, okay, you said it's not the states, then what the hell is it? They laid out how it is to be done. But I think that if they are sticking strictly to the way they're supposed to decide cases, I think they did overreach here. And I think that by saying that they have to enact enabling legislation, it's suggesting you'd have to pass a statute that says, here's how the process works. And I think that if that's the case, then it might be impossible for that statute to be used against Donald Trump, because it would be an ex post facto law. So I think that may be what the three concurring, in air quotes, justices are concerned about here.
Does it tweak your spidey sense as a prosecutor at all that the several people in Congress are also insurrectionists?
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. I mean, think about that. So you've got potentially, Madison Cawthorn, right? Didn't a judge find that he was engaging in insurrection, and others? And now who gets to decide whether these individuals engaged in insurrection? Well, that would be the insurrectionists themselves. So, talk about the fox watching the hen house. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really seem to reflect our ordinary sense of our government as having checks and balances on each other if members of Congress are now checking themselves, as opposed to courts, which are independent.
The silver lining, as I read it, according to one expert, is the court did not do what Donald Trump asked, which was to clear him of insurrection. I suspect they didn't do that because there are criminal proceedings that are ongoing against Trump right now, where that very question is the ball game. So they did not exonerate him of insurrection. They had the chance to do so and chose not to. What do you make of that?
Well, once again, I think that courts are only supposed to decide the question that is before them. And this is, what many people described before this decision as an off-ramp. There are a number of moving parts in this language of the 14th Amendment. And so if there's a procedural way that this fails, then it's really not proper for them to answer the substantive question. But I still think it's good news. I mean, I suppose to the extent they did overreach in saying not only what it's not, but what it is, they could have gone further and said, and by the way, he did not engage in insurrection. And that would have been, probably pretty disastrous for the fortunes of Jack Smith's work.
And is it my imagination, or was Amy Coney Barrett's statement like a political statement and not a legal statement? It was sort of like, there, calm down, liberals, everything's fine. Look, we all get along. We're not political hacks.
I think so. It was a very odd statement because in some ways she was agreeing with them and saying, court should exercise some restraint here, only decide the question needed. And so she was actually joining them in that aspect of it. But she wrote separately to say, now is not the time to be strident, ladies. Let us all get along here.
She's that girl.
The Republic is in flames, but don't get so upset about it. we need to all be together. It looked like the court worked really hard to try to have this, 9-0 unanimous decision to say, look, we're all united, everything's fine. Those videos with the dogs like sipping the cup of coffee and it's in flames and everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
But it strikes me as like what she wrote there. Like that's what you say in the hallway when you walk past, Elena Kagan by the coffee pot. Like, hey, why don't we do this a little less stridently? Instead, she put it out there. So it looks like she tried to join them, and she just thought that their language was a little too strident for her taste, and she wanted to kind of calm down the temperatures. So justice, you get to write what you want.
She passed Elena and said, "Stop trying to make fetch happen." Something else from Mean Girls. Okay. See, that's why sisters-in-law is so popular, because you're like the kind of women that support other women.
Right.
Support each other.
Yeah.
So, speaking of your prosecutorial spidey sense, Trump appeared to suggest that he would be open to blackmail if the Supreme Court upholds the lower court decision that he does not have immunity from criminal prosecution. He said presidents will always be concerned, even paralyzed, by the prospect of wrongful prosecution and retaliation after they leave office. That could actually lead to extortion and blackmail. As a prosecutor, would make me kind of go, that sounds like someone that has already engaged in blackmail. They would be open to blackmail. We seem to have survived this many years with presidents not having. Yes, but go ahead.
I was going to say, Donald Trump engages in an amazing amount of projection. He has also previously said, well, if presidents aren't immune, then every successive president's going to just indict his predecessor.